Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Big Brother 26. I'm David Bloomberg, and I have to admit I'm somewhat surprised to be talking about Joseph this week instead of chemo. I'll get into that more later in a bit, but first, welcome back to my co-host. The word sensational comes to mind. Ovi Kabir, who is done traveling for now.
For now, thank you, David. Yes, sorry, I've been in and out this season, but I'm here to stay, and I'm going to cover every single thing because this season just keeps getting more interesting, and I think I can follow along while I'm traveling, but I can't. I was as surprised as many of you probably watching, including David, when Joseph went home, but that's why we're here, kind of talk about why it happened.
Yep. So I do want to thank Cliff again for filling in, and he got to discuss Tucker.
He did. And he did a good job of it. I know he's been waiting for that moment. He has his own platform to talk about it too. But I think you and him, when I was listening, going back and forth about that entire episode, he had a good time.
Yeah. As you know, as we both mentioned, we were surprised Joseph got evicted. I went into Thursday afternoon, or rather after live feeds cut off. I was going into the episode thinking, it was possible, maybe even likely, probably I would say that he'd get the boot if Chemo won the AI arena. But then when Julie posted a preview of the comp on Instagram, I figured Rubina would win, which she did, and then Chemo would be voted out. I was half right. When Mackenzie went to vote and had that long pause before finally saying Joseph's name, I knew it was over for him at that moment. But until then, I thought he was safe. I was operating in my head based on the idea that he was safe.
Yeah, I think this week, as people maybe watch back or episode only watchers, you might feel a little left out on certain details that we're going to talk about because I think a lot of people were misted from the edit, from the conversations that were happening. Even post interviews, we learned more things from Joseph about why he exactly went home. But it was interesting because this season we've talked about how there's so many people who are aligned with one another that it's fluid. And I think last night showed that perfectly.
Yeah. Well, despite me thinking Joseph was safe, there were definitely some clear reasons he was voted out, as we saw, especially this week, but even going back to the start of the game. And while Quinn was certainly part of the reason, just nominating Joseph doesn't provide anywhere near the full explanation. To figure that out, we'll follow our usual path of comparing how he played to My Rules for Winning, which I originally wrote 20 years ago in 2004 and have modified ever since. We'll analyze his actions using what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and other information. And of course, the most recent version of the rules is at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules. Now, we generally have some other things to discuss about the week, and this is no exception. I want to start by focusing on the Leah, Quinn, Joseph triangle. And actually, I guess mostly just on the first two sides of that triangle, since we'll talk plenty about Joseph later. But the way Leah truly did have Quinn and Joseph wrapped around her little finger is just incredible, especially since I don't really think that was her original intent and she just kind of stumbled into it, much like she stumbled in, through the first half of the game without really playing the game or knowing what was going on. But it also helped that they threw themselves at her and she started to realize the kind of power that came with being the center of attention. She knew she could do just about anything and they would forgive her. So I just hope when she gets out of the house, she uses these powers on men for good, never for evil.
I think we're putting too much blame on Leah for manipulating the men when they're throwing themselves off like penguins jumping off a bridge. I mean, I don't even think she utilized the power she had over them probably in the most correct way, because basically what if the person who self-professed that he would take her to the final two, essentially, no matter what she did, she sent packing in a way. She was a catalyst for that.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it was. I think I appreciate that they both realized, Quinn and Joseph, they're like, yeah, Leah's really not into us, because as they said in the confessional, I feel like it would have got worse and worse if they were under the delusion that she was. But yeah, I mean, they were ready to be her sword and shield. And Leah, it seems like she has drifted through the game, maneuvered it in certain ways, like you said, but maybe there's a bigger plan to it. Maybe she doesn't want to use that power for that. Maybe she wants to use her power to manipulate for good, not bad.
Well, the one power she did use was the power of veto. And like you mentioned, the fact that she had Joseph in her pocket was one big reason she shouldn't have. Uh, she knew Quinn would potentially, maybe even likely, nominate Joseph, though she would later claim she forgot. That, minor detail. Who can remember things like that? Um, Quinn obviously should have known better than to make such a nomination, but Leah should have as well. Probably more so since Joseph was more important to her game than to Quinn's. And, we heard her say she thought Angela would be loyal to her and so on. But come on. You know who else thought that? Tucker. Has she not seen how Angela has played literally this whole game? You cannot rely on that. You cannot rein in the crazy.
I missed last. I wasn't able to be here to talk about it, but so not to throw too much back to it, but level of frustration with Angela that I feel like we're in Angela. Like, this is Angela's world, and we're just living in it. The feeling I felt for Tucker, I didn't
I
feel
don't think we
sympathy for
are living in Angela's world. I think she's in a whole different world. But go ahead.
she has her own gravitational pull.
Yeah.
You think she should? There's going to be some sort of judgment. There's going to be some form of just comeuppance of all the things Angela has done within the game. That we're going to see it.
Mhm.
No, somehow it works for her when it shouldn't, and it has. This Tucker thing specifically last week when I was watching it, seeing how basically she didn't believe a single thing Tucker was saying when he was the only one basically trying to go for bat for her. And I just don't know what Leah was thinking, that this is the woman that's going to give her a vote in jury. No, this is the woman who's going to get her out during jury.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, but really, I do think there was a more important reason that Leah used the veto, whether she realized it or not. On Thursday's episode, Leah said that having a little power felt awesome. Because remember, she really hasn't had any. And I think that in her mind, consciously or subconsciously, she figured, what's the point of finally winning power if you don't use it? And she later even said, I'm kind of sick of being at everyone's mercy. And then that she wanted to make some big moves. The power, the ability to do something, I think just went to her head.
Most definitely, David. I think that's such a good point you bring up. And I think one thing that some players and house kids forget, that there's a level of power in withholding an action without doing something. She has ability in her hands to do something with it, but deciding, hey, there's a better course of action, and then utilizing that action of not doing something to better further her game. I mean, really, she had the perfect map going forward, saying, hey, I don't want to utilize this. Don't upset your teammates. Show that you can win something. I mean, it is truly, this is like a 3-1 loss, right? They had a lead. They had such a big lead going into this right here. And just somehow, it's lost it.
Yeah. All right. Well, switching topics a bit, one other thing I want to mention is something we see often in Big Brother, which is hypocrisy. In this case, specifically coming from T-Core, because she was so mad at Quinn for his nominations. And sure, I understand. Nobody wants to see their allies on the block. But she acted like she had been so loyal to him. How could he do this? Apparently forgetting when she and Chemo flipped the vote against him without alerting him the last time he was HOH.
I mean, it's a trend this entire season. We see it a lot of other seasons, but this season specifically, they love putting their allies on the block. If you're an ally and you know that your friend or your person in the house is on like HOH, you just gotta expect the season you're going up as a pawn with these 3 nominations with BB Arena. Every week, somebody who probably shouldn't be on the block is on the block. So I don't know what the surprise is here, because when T-Core is my winner pick too, she did the exact same thing last week.
Yeah, and like I said, on the live feed, she even was complaining to Chemo at one point. I don't like hypocrisy, and I'm like, well, then don't look in a mirror. And I know lots of players on Big Brother are hypocritical. I really enjoyed Joseph coming out, and when Julie was like, "Are you upset?" He's like, "No. If I were upset, that would be totally hypocritical. I've been playing the game. Why should I be upset?" Love that, because we so rarely get it.
Mhm.
Uh, but and that was a perfect example with T-Core. Um, but anyway, those were just a couple aspects of things that happened, and I do have to say it was a fun week. So I just want to follow up on something that Cliff and I talked about last week, which was that everything that happened in the past 7 days, including the surprising outcome, are good examples of why I said that Tucker leaving did not mean the end of the season for all those people going, oh, woe is me. Oh, no, the season's over. We're not going to watch anymore. Still plenty of entertainment.
No, exactly. And I think for people, they feel that because the show, keep in mind, there's so many house guests on this every season, 16 people that you have to divvy out spotlight to. When you have big personalities, which they do cast typically big personalities, you can only showcase some of them, and some sprout out to be a little bigger personalities than others. Tucker
Mhm.
was one of them. But when with his removal, we now get to see the other house guests get to shine. I mean, that's kind of the fun thing
Yep.
of it. Anybody who's watched Game of Thrones, we know one of our favorite characters goes out. There's a power vacuum, and we love to see them fight for more power. That's exactly what's happening.
All right. Well, do you have anything or anyone you want to discuss before we move to our regular segment and then the rules?
I wanted to talk about Angela, and I feel like we've already got to speak about just the level of each week she surprises me in such a way that I don't know what goes through her head. And the whole Joseph conversation with her, and then her feeling the smudginess of him now having
Mhm.
to go back and apologize for her just killed me. Just killed me because she never learns from any of these conversations because nothing bad happened. There's no consequences that
Right.
end her to have to learn differently. And I think it was funny enough the first time it happened with like Matt, the first week where we see her
Yeah.
kind of have this level of hypocrisy week in and week out. As much as I enjoy her character, it is getting I want to see at this point maybe just some consequences of her own bad gameplay come back to her. So that's my only last thing. I know there's a lot of Angela lovers there. I don't dislike Angela. I really think she's fun to watch, but also I think if any other player was perpetuating the level of behavior of just kind of going at every of her ally or teammate in Big
Mhm.
Brother, we would hope they go out of the house.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go to our usual Julie Chen Moonves is wrong about blank segment.
Woo!
And this week we have another situation where she was interviewed by Entertainment Weekly, and they asked her if Leah made the right call taking Angela off the block with the veto. Now, we just answered that. So, what did Julie say? She said yes, because she acted with her heart. And when you act with your heart, it can't be wrong. Gag. Uh, no, wrong. In fact, that is wrong. Acting with your heart in the game of Big Brother is often very wrong. It literally violates one of my rules.
Does big
We
hearts.
already discussed why it was the wrong decision for Leah. And then on top of that, in response to another question in the same interview, Julie said players have to, quote, do what is right for you always. Well, that's a contradiction because that was not right for Leah. She may have thought it was. She did think it was, but it wasn't objectively right for her. So no, Julie, stop it. And again, stop asking. I mean, I guess keep asking Julie these questions because it gives us fodder for this segment. But the idea that Julie has any idea how to play the game is just constantly amusing to me.
It's propaganda at this point. I have to believe. I don't even
Yeah.
believe she believes what she's saying here. I mean, it's Big Brother slash Bigger Hearts. Like this is a new show she creates. So I just at this point, I'm unsure if they're just feeding this information so we have content here because they love this segment so much. They need it. Obi and David need this segment there.
Yeah.
So
So let's give them something. Yes.
I know.
All right. Well, before we get to the rules, I do want to mention, of course, that a Survivor version of the rules comes in a shorter and more colorful version in poster form. You can go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, click on it, and order it. Get it now, and hopefully you'll have it in time for the new Survivor season to start. You can also scroll down and get the poster on a T-shirt, or the poster. Or the checklist on a T-shirt. The checklist, of course, closest to the Big Brother rules, not exact, but closest. So again, go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, and you'll be styling.
Will be.
Joseph told Julie immediately after being evicted that he thought it was possibly because the others saw him as more of a threat than chemo, because he was good with everyone. He said in interviews later that he attributed his loss to a little bit of hubris and a little bit of his allies being stupid. Did he hit the mark in any of his ideas of what went wrong for him, or did he miss the big picture? I'll give you a hint. Yes and yes. We'll get it all sorted out as we figure out why Joseph lost. The first and most important rule is to scheme and plot. Players like Brooklyn and Chelsea had very strong beliefs that Joseph just sat around all day and didn't do this at all. But they're wrong. The fact is that Joseph was indeed strategizing and playing hard. He was just doing it in a way that purposely kept it secret from certain people like Brooklyn and Chelsea. And I also have to say it was kept secret from a lot of the TV viewers as well, because I still have people commenting like, you're wrong, he did nothing, on some of my TikTok videos. It's like, no, you just didn't see it. He discussed on his live feeds, or on live feeds, how his plan was to separate himself from people so it wouldn't look like he was doing anything, and incidentally also to help preserve some of his sanity, but mostly for strategic reasons. Meanwhile, he positioned himself early with both the anti-Tucker side of the collective, which he insisted he'd created and certainly kept pushing, but also he was with Tucker himself. The latter purposely in case Tucker went on a comp run and gained power in the House. Lo and behold, that's what happened. So Joseph became Tucker's closest ally, at least until, Rubina. But from a strategic standpoint, Joseph was often in his ear, trying to guide things while also protecting some of his other allies like Quinn. It was a good position to be in, at least for a while.
Very much so. I mean, I think Joseph's really secured a good position where we see a lot of people play the middle, but he was able to do so where he could go back and forth. Now, the issue when you play that middle is what we saw with Joseph's game is that, yes, you have allies in both sides, but the allies on either sides can kind of tank your games, which we kind of saw. So, I mean, he schemed and planned through it, and I think it's a bit of a disservice sometimes to edit into his game where it likened him to Leah a little bit, where they showcase, oh, we're just floating through the game, and that's what he wanted to relate to Leah as well. And she believed it, and many others did too, even though he was having a concerted effort. And again, we always talk about some players forget that this game's a marathon, not a sprint. Joseph knew that, and I think we would have seen his game transform just a little bit later when he would get into jury phase, which he also did mention that was part of his plans that, typically if this was a normal Big Brother season, he would have been in jury by now.
Yeah. Now, one area where Joseph got a bit too enamored of his plan was that he actually believed he could beat Tucker if they made it to final two together. He did say in his interviews that he didn't think Tucker would make it all the way just because of the threat he posed, but he maintained that he thought he could win because people didn't like how Tucker treated some others like Quinn. And that's all well and good. But I'm telling you, it wouldn't have mattered. Tucker would almost have certainly had to improve his own game to make it that far. So as long as he didn't continue attacking people in that way, it would have been, left in the rearview mirror. Meanwhile, if he had actually made it, the feat would have been so impressive for a big threat to make it all the way through. There's just no way Joseph was going to overcome it. Now, of course, it didn't happen anyway, but I at least wanted to mention it.
I think it's a good point because, So much when you're in the Big Brother house, you're a worm inside a rotten apple, and you can't see the rotten apple from the outside. So you have no idea of different perspectives. And so this is one of those things that I like, in that when Joseph has a little bit more time out of the house, can probably understand it. It's nothing personal against him. It's against anybody else. Probably no one would have compared against Tucker in the final two, from his ability to do
Right.
whatever he was doing. I think some people might overestimate in the moment where one comment or two comments might rub somebody the wrong way. I could even see Quinn voting for Tucker at the end if he made it that far. But I think, again, it's one of those things where you're also in a phase of trying to convince yourself what you can do, and you have, to justify to keep somebody. I can still beat
Right.
them. I can stay here, there. So, I mean, if there's one thing, I mean, I also think Joseph did accept in his folly was that maybe a little overconfidence in this stuff. But within the scheming and plotting, he kept it going. That was part of it. I mean, we can't diss him for that being part of his plans. It's just
Right.
maybe a bad evaluation of his final judgment.
Yes. Now, after Tucker was evicted last week, Joseph quickly went to work on Quinn, talking about how, well, that was better for him anyway, And indeed, it should have been. He had Quinn, the HOH, on his side. He had Leah, the veto winner, on his side. He should have been set this week. And this is where some stupid decisions of his allies come into play. I have previously shouted to the hilltops, don't volunteer to go on the block. I guess I should have added, and don't put your allies on the block. You might think Quinn would have learned this when Cedric was evicted, but no. Yeah.
I mean, Quinn is your winner pick, and I think there's a small joy I get every time I see one of Quinn's plans just fall apart, and it's become so comical.
He's like
Yeah, no, I mean,
Wile E. Coyote at this point.
yeah, it's impressive how some of these house just don't learn from their mistakes. I mean, again, I understand you need three people up there, but somebody mad at you is much better than your ally, especially with smaller numbers going home, especially your ally going home before jury. These are
Mhm.
numbers you want to have there. Yes, Leah had a certain, I don't hate the plan in her mind. She wants somebody in jury that will vote for her and keep her there. I don't love the execution of it, because the thing is,
Well,
Joseph was that for her. It was
exactly.
she had the right idea what she needed to do, but the wrong plan.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Getting back to Joseph's actual play and away from his allies' play, uh, there were other times throughout the game that he showed he knew what he was doing. Like when he absolutely refused to be a pawn for Cedric when he was looking for one, and how he pegged Chelsea as a threat early on because he saw her as such a good player. Unfortunately, he did some things wrong related to that, which we'll get to in the second rule. Kind of a hint. But at least he was right about how dangerous she is. He told Mike Bloom he even made a last ditch attempt shortly before the live show to get her to vote to keep him by promising her safety if he won HOH. Unfortunately for him, the idea of him winning HOH was not exactly tops on anyone's mind. And of course, Chelsea already had plenty of plans with other people to keep herself safe. In fact, it made good sense for Chelsea to vote him out because she's in good with T-Core and therefore with Chemo and Rubina. So, you know, she keeps her circle more intact by getting rid of him.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a catch 2020 when you go through the house and you kind of make yourself not to be a comp beast, or maybe just the opposite of it, somebody who's just unable to win any
Yeah.
competitions. And yes, some of them he threw, but his track record wasn't the greatest there. So I think, unfortunately, you can't sell or write checks based on that versus somebody like Tucker. He's on the other extreme of it, where at
Right.
that point they're like, no, we still need to get you out. But there was a fear of, if they win this, would they protect me or get me out? Joseph just didn't have that autonomy to make that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. The AI arena, people were watching it and going, is he throwing this? No, he just was that bad at it.
He was moving slow. My brother was moving slow. That mustache weighed him down.
Yeah.
He was trying to get around that rope and just.
Now, of course, the people Joseph really should have been pushing, not Chelsea, but Quinn and Leah, as he told Julie. But he did not believe Leah was going to use the veto and didn't want to push too hard because he felt it could cause an opposite reaction. Now, I don't know if he could have gotten Leah or Quinn to change their minds. We've already discussed, Leah's motivation, but he's certainly right that he should have tried harder.
Yeah, I mean, I Quinn even talks about how he begged on his knees for Leah to make it. Joseph had a conversation, but I just don't think any of them were truly. I think in those type of things, you have to be a little bit more serious to get it through your teammate's mind,
Yeah,
your house guest ally, to be like, "Hey, you do this. This changes our relationship in a way." Because I don't think she understood the ramifications, or also just like it more so like, "Oh, if it happens, it happens." Like they're not going to be super mad at me. And they also
yeah,
said that even after the fact that we can't hold anything against Leah.
right.
I think that was the downfall of it. Like somebody knows they can get away with
Yeah, and I just don't think they realized they didn't have a good read of the house of what would happen.
it.
You know. Uh, all right. Well, we can move on to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Joseph managed to do a great job of this in the earlier part of the season, as we discussed in the first rule, and then completely blow it over the course of the past week. Because once Tucker was gone, he started telling everybody everything about his game, including a lot of things that should have been the inside force. Uh, Part of the reason he was saying so much was, as he told Quinn on live feeds, he realized that other players thought he'd been doing nothing and he needed to set himself up for the end game by explaining what he'd done in case he made it to final two. But in his interviews, he also said he just wanted to be honest with people for various reasons and thought it would help to get them to trust him. But no, it made things worse, not better. Part of it was that people, much like we did, people there thought he was nuts to say he thought he could have beaten Tucker at the end. Uh,
Mhm.
but more importantly was the fact of admitting he had a final two with the guy they just voted out. We can and should blame Quinn for putting Joseph on the block, but we also have to recognize that being hooked to Tucker and voting to keep him is what earned Joseph that position, according to the logic that Quinn used.
I would argue almost that this rule, maybe with 7 too, we'll talk about don't trust anybody, but this one is what really sent Joseph home. And I liken it to when I was watching everything, keeping up with things. This is how I like it. He's kind of when a supervillain at the end, James Bond supervillain, they have to tell their plan. They have to sell it all. You can't just, finish the job, take the hero out, or do one. You have to have a full-on monologue to talk about why you've done anything. He had this with Mackenzie, apparently. He had this with Chelsea. He had this with Angela. He doesn't need to tell them what he thinks about them. I know, like, he tried to liken it that he wanted Chelsea when he had a conversation with her about she felt scared that she's a bit of a too much of a threat. He wanted to say, no, we can bond. We
Right.
are both threats here. My game's better than yours, so don't be worried. And I understand the intention behind it, but I think he was just a little bored and wanted to, like you said, he wanted to make sure people understood that he was a power player, but a little too early than he needed to be, because telling Angela all that and having to go grovel back, and just to give context, is when him and Angela sat down and she was in
Right.
the seat of fire, being evicted
Mhm.
potentially, and he was basically like, yeah, your game is done, it's dead, I mean, just enjoy it while you can. um, yeah, I just think he just kept on going so hard about those type of conversations that really sunk his social game to reconnect with those players.
Yeah, and see that's the key. You say that, this rule and 7 are going to be the keys. I say it's rule 5, but it's still the same
Yeah,
things. It's just a matter I had an internal debate, do I
yeah,
put it in rule 2 or rule 5? And I decided on rule 5, which we'll
it's
get to
valid.
more when we get there. But um, eh, the thing is, everything you said is absolutely true. And it wasn't the only way he overplayed, because many people saw him as a snake, which was Quinn's words, or at least as someone they couldn't trust. And this went back to Tucker telling Joseph that everyone in their six was skeptical of him. he thought he had this solid base, but he never really did. And that includes some of the people that you mentioned, like Mackenzie. He told Mike Bloom that her vote against him surprised him because she and Chemo never talk game. But the funny thing to me is he answered his own question because he said, I was the one person who maybe talked game with Mackenzie the most in the house. I would want to go to the end with her because she didn't start playing the game till day 45. So he told her he didn't think she played well. She knew, therefore, or concluded that she would never get his vote at the end if she made final two and he wasn't up against her. By being overly honest with her about how he viewed her game, he just told her way too much.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like when you have a mentor in any capacity, whether it's like you're learning how to do a sport, you're learning how, you have an older brother teaching you how to play chess or swim, whatever. They're going to tell you, critique and be like, this is why you're doing this badly. This is why you need to improve. Not in the game, brother, get big brother. You don't need to do that
Right.
because then they see you as just basically not valuing your game and realizing, oh, they look at me as a weak opponent. Like they think they can always beat me. In some cases, some players want to keep that person around and surprise them at the end. For somebody like Mackenzie, she sees that as a direct threat. And I think also for Chelsea, I don't think this was intentional. I don't want to say anything from Joseph in this sense of that, but I think within the overplaying, I think there was a common theme with many of the women in the house who felt like Joseph might think that he can beat them and he can convey that to them. And I think that unfortunately was him having a level of hubris, but also overplaying what he needed to do at that point.
Yes. Yes. It's kind of like you're playing poker and you're saying to the guy ahead of you, hey, by the way, you have a tell. Every time you're bluffing, I know you're bluffing because your eye
Yeah,
told this. And they're going to be like, okay, then
you're gonna roll your eyes.
now I know how to beat you, you know?
Yeah.
Because I've actually had, when I was playing, I actually had someone tell me, not in the middle of a game, and they were a friend, but they were like, hey, some of these people here know or believe that they have a tell on you. So, okay, I started to use that. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you puff your cheeks out when you do this. I'm like, okay, I'll start using that to my advantage. But you don't want to be the one in the middle of the game telling your opponent that.
Mhm. No, most definitely. I think it just comes off, unfortunately, as so cocky in the moment. And the issue I had with this with Joseph, he positioned himself in a game where he could play under the radar and be on both sides and never call attention to himself. He
And then
didn't
you sent
need
up
to do that.
radar flares.
Yeah, no, he's just like, and it shoots out each of the flares. And I'm just like, why, Joseph? You've done this so well. You've been under the cover. Why are you doing this, Joseph? No, notice me. That's my double flare gun for Joseph
Yes.
as he shoots them out. Very passionate about how
Yes.
frustrated I am with how he played this last week. Because he was playing really well.
All right. Well, the third rule talks about the need to be flexible. Now, you often talk about how people need to be tested in order to truly see if
Mhm.
they can adapt and follow this rule. I do think Joseph was tested a couple times. So, how do you think he did here?
I don't love how he was. It's tough. I think throughout I think that initially before this week, I liked his flexibility of how he's trying to be. I also think he put his foot down when he was pushed, where like trying not to go on the block during Cedric's week when he was going up. Um, Other situations. This week, we did see him have a flexibility where he was put on the block, right? And then he tried to go back to Angela, talk to her about it and everything. I do think, unfortunately, though, he still didn't think he would be going home. I don't think he did enough in these situations. I mean, I don't know how much to put the blame on him or just around me because you and I were confused. I think the rest of the house was kind of confused about like who would go home truly. So I
Yeah.
don't know if it was a lack of flexibility this week that really sent him packing, or it was more so of not evaluating the surrounding and the people around him. Because I do think he did play better flexibility wise when he was put on the block, but I think I guess this is a weird way to say, but I think he might have been a little too flexible this week. And by that, I mean that he didn't push against
Right.
Leah enough, or when he was there, he kind of like held her hand and was like, "This is okay. All right, Quinn, I'm not going to talk good. Like, I'm going to talk bad about you behind your back in the DR, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let it be okay out here." So I wonder if he was just a little bit more stern about it. That makes it like put the fire under his allies, butts. That like, hey, I need you here to help me stay here. Let's rally. And I think he might be a little too nonchalant. What are your thoughts, David?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about how Joseph started out leaning towards Quinn's side and against Tucker, but he always stayed close to Tucker in case he gained power. And when that happened, he more clearly threw in his lot with Tucker while also staying close to Quinn and protecting him. And then he went back to Quinn when Tucker was gone. I will say, I think Joseph did a pretty good job of protecting Quinn from Tucker by convincing him that Quinn wasn't a threat and all that, while also making sure not to push his views so hard that Tucker would realize what he was doing. It's just that once Tucker left, Joseph wasn't able to translate that to working with the other players. He was protecting them, but didn't basically get protected in turn.
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of his gameplay really. I don't, the word relies. I don't like that because I don't think it truly relied. But I think it was based on the strategy that Tucker would be around, and he had a strong shield around him as he
Mm-hmm.
played that middle. Again, this is one of those weeks where like if something went slightly wrong, maybe Joseph wouldn't have gone home. I think he would have found a way to stay here. But I mean, we're saying this almost every other week. We're like, man, everything had to go right for this person. Like Cedric's week, we're like,
Yeah.
everything had to go wrong for Cedric to go home. And I don't know if it's just that extent for Joseph, but at the same time, I don't think because of this rule of his flexibility, put him on the seat of fire. If anything, uh, this is his allies and
Yeah.
flexibilities.
All right. Well, then we can move on to the fourth rule, which says players should not let their emotions control them, despite what Julie says.
Trust your
Joseph,
heart.
yes. Joseph came into the game knowing he needed to follow this rule. He just didn't understand quite how much. He told Entertainment Weekly that as time went by, he realized, quote, you literally have to be a sociopath to play this game in a way that's supposed to be played because you really do have to compartmentalize. Now, I'm not saying it's good to be a sociopath, but he's right about compartmentalizing your emotions compared to game decisions.
Yeah, no, it's a very tough thing. I think most people probably struggle with that in a lot of ways. I think unfortunately he was good in a lot of ways there that he was able to kind of show his emotions when he needed to make connections there and not like control him. Unfortunately though, I think the main I would say point of him failing on this rule was the Leah issue. I think he did fall hard for Leah, as did Quinn with this little love triangle they all had. And again, probably a level of infatuation is perfectly fine. But I do think that impacted his game style and his gameplay as we move forward in this week. I mean, we saw him not take strong enough stance to make sure Leah didn't put him up there. And even elsewise, he didn't really try to work hard enough to ensure that Leah and the other people around him would have his back as much. And I think it's because of this whole, situation. I mean, I wouldn't have guessed Angela would have voted to keep him here, but she did. And I wonder what exactly all around, whether knowing that Leah took her off, Leah's connected to Joseph, maybe that was some
No,
shape or form.
she just did
But
it because she thought that the House was voting that way. And the funny thing is, even if like Mackenzie had not apparently changed her mind,
yeah,
Angela could have been the deciding factor, and
yeah,
so she just thought there was no chance that her vote wasn't going to matter. But yeah, you mentioned the Leah factor, and Joseph told us he told himself / us in a camera talk that he was supposed to be a robot with no emotions. And the problem was that same talk about, it was mostly about how he had a crush on Leah and he disgusted himself because he was going against his own thoughts. Now, I know there was a mini debate on the most recent Stockwatch podcast about whether you can just turn off a crush. But to my mind, it's not about having a crush or turning it off. It's about knowing, okay, I have a crush on this person, but I'm putting it aside to ensure that I'm doing what's best for my game. And it's one thing to like someone, but it's another to change your game because you like them.
Mhm.
And we had a whole segment that we talked about earlier on Thursday's episode about how Leah could basically manipulate Joseph and Quinn because they both have crushes on her. Even when her actions caused the chain of events leading to Joseph being nominated, both of them refused to tell her that they were upset at her. And I suspect that it was part of the reason Joseph wasn't more forceful in telling her she shouldn't use the veto to begin with. Instead, he was busy telling her things like, I mean everything I tell you when I tell you that you're my favorite person here. And he previously told her he spent a lot of time thinking about how to keep her safe.
Mhm.
Clearly, she didn't spend any time doing the same
Yeah.
for him.
It just hurts hearing all that, you repeating it all again, because it's
Yeah.
just like one of those things you don't look back and be like, damn, I really was just like missed it there. I mean, I think a good example of it, I think again, like you mentioned, I want to reiterate that you can have a crush in the house. It's just how it controls you. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I really felt like Tucker and Rabina did a good way of, especially Tucker, navigating his feelings for Rabina and not really letting it impact his game so much. So, or even he was trying to talk to Angela or saying whether it was truly true or not. He was willing to have those conversations and be like, "Hey, I made a commitment to you. I want to work with you." And we can't say for sure. He probably may pick Rubina at the end. But he was able to, you know, compartmentalize and put his actual game logic forward. Um, Unfortunately, Joseph had a blind eye to Leah.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, the fifth rule says players need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. And as I mentioned earlier, Joseph believed he was good socially with everyone, and he talked about it a lot. But saying it doesn't make it so, much like I mentioned last week about Angela telling everyone she'd gotten to know them on a personal level. If you have to tell them that you've gotten to know them on a personal level, you haven't. Same thing with the social game. If you have to tell everyone you have a good social game, you don't. Um, but worse than that was the way Joseph told everyone what he thought about their games as well as his own. Now, we talked about this some already. And like I said, you've got this whole rule 2, rule 5 thing going
Yeah.
on here. I want to focus on it more here because it really impacted what other players thought of him on a social level. And they were getting annoyed with hearing about how great his game was and what flaws he saw in the others. It's been pointed out by more than a few people that it's funny how Joseph was probably liked more by the other players when he was separating himself from them and not really talking to them compared to when he started interacting with them more.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I also think that exaggerated and like was a catalyst for them feeling this way was basically it's one thing to have a mid-par social game. I'm not even saying he had a subpar social game. I'm more so he told other people they had a subpar social game,
Yeah.
and that's like the quickest way from going to 100 to 0 to where somebody can be like, actually, I don't like you. Why are you insulting? I think it's a little different insult when you're like, I think you're doing this wrong in this game part versus saying like your social game kind of sucks. You're dead in the water.
Yeah.
That's going to make somebody evoke certain feelings out of them. And I think again, we know from his conversations, I think it was it was intended in a positive manner. He was trying not to, he
Right.
wanted to really truly help him out from his POV. Worst thing he could have done. Worst thing he
Yeah.
could have
Yeah.
done.
I mean, in just a few examples of things that the players said, Rubina told Tikor that Joseph made her feel small, and Tikor replied, Joseph made everybody feel small. Um, Joseph told Mackenzie he only saw her as a threat at physical comps, not as a threat for the entire game. Now, in his interviews, he said he was just trying to make her worry less, that others saw her as a threat that they wanted to take out. But he also said his conversation where he told Angela she had no shot was more nuanced. Maybe in his own mind, he wasn't as blunt as he came across, but it often was not perceived that way by people on the receiving end. Another example was Quinn talking about how Joseph constantly saying he was the better player bothered him. Again, in Joseph's mind, he was joking around. Not so much in Quinn's. Um, Cam said on the live feeds shortly after the eviction that he knew Joseph had been rubbing people the wrong way. All of these things tended to pile up and make people less concerned about voting him out. It's like, if we lose him, I mean, they're not fighting to keep him like people were fighting to keep Rubina and Chemo.
Yeah, and I think the issue was it wasn't like one person or maybe even two people that he had
Mm-hmm.
these bad conversations with. It was individuals that every single person around the board he was. And that's the thing is that he could do 90% good with them, have great conversations, but those 10% of those conversations where he is talking about their social game or talking about how they need to better their game or his game is better than theirs, will stick with them. And it did. And it really just kind of, it was just so unneeded. And again, I think it was one of those things where it becomes a tipping factor, right? It
Right.
wasn't so bad that immediately they're like, put him on the block. Let's do this. It was something that kept growing that I think is a worrisome. What we always talk about is, which will transition into soon, is like when you become a target, it adds to that.
Right. Now, Joseph also admitted to some hubris in the final week, which I think is a bit of an understatement. Uh, Others might say his ego was out of control while he thought he was safe. Again, it's a matter of perspective. I really don't think Joseph realized how he was coming across to people.
Yeah, I know. It's this is one of those things again. It's like your POV is different. I wonder if maybe because we really saw it come in full effect after Tucker was gone. So I don't know if
Yeah.
maybe with Tucker being there, it was he felt that, or not being there, he felt like he needed to maybe step up in his personality a little bit more, and he was maybe trying to come across more, confident and funny. Because
Hmm.
there's a very big line, right? Of confident, funny, and over
Right.
cocky and hubris, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so unsure. And same in the real world, when you do that stuff, you have a friend to check you, be like, "Shut up, you're doing too much
Yeah.
now." The
Yeah.
Big Brother house, people aren't going to really check you too much because it's like, "Ooh, we're not going to do that until we want to vote you out. We're not going to check
Right.
you. Like, I don't like your
Right.
behavior."
Right.
So
Exactly. All right, we could go to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. Now, I mentioned earlier that Joseph believed one reason he was voted out was because he was more of a threat than Chemo. Do you think that's the case?
it's a tough one to say because I don't think that was a natural reason. What I don't
Hmm.
think they were threatened so level where like he's gonna get us out. I think they felt because on that matter, Chemo's probably a worse person for them in a way because they knew he was somewhat not allied with them. He could go another way, um, but I think Joseph's comments from this last thing like made him a bigger
Yeah.
target because they realized, wow, you really don't value us as much. We're more annoyed that we want to like. It's one thing. It's like have you ever been in a situation, David? And I imagine you have been. Is that there might be somebody at a table or you have a group of friends and somebody you just hate, absolutely hate. They might make a good point. They might be right about something, but because you dislike them, you're not
Hmm.
going to agree with them. You don't want to
Right.
hear them be right. You're going to actually argue against them. And I think this is one of those situations that maybe some people would have viewed Chemo actually as worse for their games in certain ways, but because of Joseph's behavior and it growingly talking about all
Hmm.
this stuff, uh, they're like, no, we want him out. And more than anything, I think they knew exactly where Joseph sat on the fence with all his
Right.
comments. With Chemo, there's a little bit more maybe mystery, or at least Chemo could sugarcoat it where they could believe Chemo might work with them or value their game a little bit more when Joseph made it very clear that he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple weeks ago, Joseph talked on the live feeds about how he wanted to keep Tucker around as a shield because once Tucker was gone, people would see what he was doing. Now, as we discussed earlier, some people still didn't see what he was doing. And I really think most of the rest didn't particularly care. Certainly not as much as he thought they would. I doubt anyone believed he was the biggest threat in the game. And of course, that's not why he was nominated. We know why he was nominated. But by the end, it got down to the question of him or Chemo. And some commenters asked me, I had done a immediate post eviction little TikTok, and just to say, oh wow, I was surprised. Some commenters asked why people would choose to get rid of someone who is seen as a loner and can't win comps compared to someone who is more well liked and in a solid 3-person alliance. And that's kind of part of the answer. because there were only 4 votes against him. And 2 of those were members of that solid 3-person alliance. So, of course, they're going to, want to keep Chemo. The other 2 were Chelsea, who, as we've discussed already, didn't have a good connection with Joseph at all, and Mackenzie, who also had issues we talked about. So, as much as every player wants to believe they were voted out because they were a threat, sometimes it's just not about that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things you want to tell yourself that too. And I think in this situation, I mean, he became a threat to some of their individual games as a whole, probably not the level, but at the same time, I think Chemo's threat level is so low at the same time as an individual player at this point of the game. It was so much that a feather could blow either way, right? And so it was what side of the house felt. And like we saw, it was a very clear, very close 3-4. Yes, Angela might have been on the other side of things if she knew, but very close.
Right.
It wasn't the reason why he went home.
Yeah. All right. Well, the 7th rule says to trust almost nobody, and Joseph certainly knew this. The problem was, as we've discussed, he was often far too open in showing or even telling exactly who he trusted and who he didn't. And then the 2 people he trusted most made terrible decisions that negatively impacted his game. So even though they did not do it with the intention of hurting his game, that was the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said beforehand, arguably 2, maybe 5 in this rule are the reasons why he went home. Trusting people that he shouldn't, trusting people, I guess placing trust in the wrong people. I mean, Quinn has a bit of a track record that you ally with him, you're going home in ways. So maybe trying to hope when Quinn wins HOH, you just stay at his side and say, don't put me on the block no matter what.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think more so it was the allies that were on the fence that he started how he talked to them and really just spilled the beans. He did his whole monologue, and we've talked about this already, but it encompasses Joseph's game where I think Tucker wasn't needed there to be just his shield, but it was in a game way, but in a social way. It allowed Joseph to be in the shadows a little bit more and something he should have stayed in as we go forward until he can make his move.
Yeah. All right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So what are your thoughts about Joseph?
Yeah. I mean, I always love seeing a player who loves the game, knows the fandom, go into the game being ready to play. And I think we saw that with Joseph. He played the game hard, and he's leaving it knowing and feeling that he's satisfied where he went home. And I love that for him. As a viewer watching him, I wish we got to see a little bit more on the edit of how Joseph actually thought it through, because he did have a concrete plan in the initial parts of the game where he wanted to lay low, be smart, play that middle ground, which I think he was so good. I think the issue with Joseph that sent him truly home was partially his infatuation with Leah and infatuation with being a Big Brother fan, wanting to make these certain moves and have these clips that would allow him to be remembered forever. And I think that's what ended up sending him home, because if he continued to stay consistent with the plan where he plays both sides, stay low to the ground, I think we see Joseph go a lot further. Overall, I think it was really fun watching him play, but I think what we saw fully this week, the over trusting, overplaying. And again, if you are a future Big Brother player, don't go into a monologue of why another player's social game is bad and why your game is much better than them, because that will never turn out good.
No. So to start with here, I want to go back to my thoughts about Joseph from the preseason. He had said a lot of things that sounded good in theory. Some of it he accomplished, like his plan to manipulate people subtly while the bigger personalities wipe themselves out. He wanted to work with people who were more athletic and in different social groups, and so that he could leech off of that. And he did that as well. What I was worried about was him translating these ideas to practice, in large part because he did not give me the same instantly likable vibes that some of the others did in the pregame. And I worried he would be too much of a game bot. In retrospect, I was definitely right to be concerned about those last things. It wasn't so much Joseph's gameplay that got him in trouble. Indeed, he did a good job with it for a big chunk of his time in the game. The problems were how he dealt with some of the other players, often involving discussions of his gameplay. You can't repeatedly tell someone they're probably the best player in the house and not expect them to worry, that means you'd snipe them if you had a chance. You can't tell someone they're a bad player and go to the what you want to go to the end with them and not expect them to take it a bit personally and also want you out before jury because they feel you would never vote for them to win. You can't say things that, in Rubina and Ticor's words, made them feel small and expect that they will want to keep you around. It may seem like it only came down to the votes of Chelsea and Mackenzie, but if they had signaled their intentions earlier, both Cam and Angela would have happily jumped on board for many of the same reasons. They just thought everyone was voting out chemo and they didn't want to be left hanging. The old vote with the house idea. It's obviously true that if Leah hadn't used the veto on Angela and Quinn hadn't nominated Joseph, well, then Joseph wouldn't have been evicted. But that doesn't mean their actions, however stupid, were the main causes. Joseph might have had time to redeem his behavior if he hadn't been on the block this week. But he also might not have still fully realized what his behavior was like, such as the flippant circumstances that occurred between him and Angela. He seemed to realize something about the way he had spoken to Angela when he was on the other side. I don't know that he would have realized that if their positions hadn't changed. As I've said all this, I know it sounds like maybe people are listening and saying, oh, he really doesn't like Joseph. But actually, I did. That's one reason I was so surprised. I was, kind of rooting for him to stay. I had some high hopes for him from a strategic standpoint. And he was doing pretty well in that regard. But players have to realize how they come across to everyone else in the house. And I just don't think Joseph did. And that is why Joseph lost.
Well put. Well put. We like Joseph a lot, but we have to tell the truth too.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, we will have our spoiler-free predictions in a moment after after a few pieces of other information. And of course, if you want all of our full spoilery thoughts, we're all over social media.
Yes. Don't forget that we're both very active on a number of different social media platforms where we discuss Big Brother and other topics. On Twitter, I'm at the Ovi Kabir. On Instagram, I'm at Ovi Kabir. And on TikTok, I'm at Basmati Boy. David is truly all over the place, but there are a few ways you can track him down. You can find him on his various accounts through his Linktree at Linktree/David Bloomberg, or you can find him on Twitter and Blue Sky at David Bloomberg, and on Threads and all other video platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can find him at David Bloomberg TV. The Survivor season is starting very soon, so you will really want to make sure you follow him so you can keep up with Big Brother and Survivor content.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, since Big Brother has started, through the season, I've been posting at least 3, often more, videos per day on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. They've been a combination of Big Brother and other shows that have been on, come and gone. But even currently, I'm still posting about The Anonymous. I'll have some on Outlast, which just came back, just started on Netflix for season 2. And of course, Survivor coming up. So yeah, definitely follow me on, any and all of those accounts. With that, it's prediction time. As I mentioned, they are spoiler free, so we write them up before we know the outcome, even of the HOH comp. And Ovi and I were kind of time stamping it last night. Like, okay, here's mine. Okay. Now, even though this flip occurred against what Quinn and Leah wanted, I really don't think it was a flip against them personally, but rather against Joseph for all the reasons we, just spent the better part of an hour discussing. At least from Chelsea and Mackenzie's point of view. If Ticor, Chemo, or Rubino win HOH, then yeah, Quinn's in trouble. But I don't think that will happen. I think this is Mackenzie's week to win HOH. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that she just saved Chemo, I think she's going to turn around and put him and Rubino right back up on the block. Because it really wasn't about saving Chemo. It was about getting rid of Joseph. And this time, I think Chemo will actually be leaving.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I have mine timestamped. And I have T Court winning this. I think she's going to go for a second HOH of the season. She's going to win. I think the three people we're going to see up is going to be Quinn, Leah, and Cam. And so I think we're going to see some trouble from them. Maybe Angela will take Cam's position there. And I think, crossing my fingers, I've predicted it many times this year, but I think this might be the 1 week Quinn finally goes home.
You just want to get rid of my winner prediction.
I'm trying. I've been shooting at all cylinders. Unfortunately, that man just finds a way to survive and get out everybody, including his allies, out. So, an enemy, an ally, Quinn, better be feared. If you're not Quinn, you're going home, essentially. That's how his game is.
Yeah.
But that aside. And now, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out our RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Rob has several patron-only podcasts for Big Brother, plus every other perk like the Facebook group and Discord. You can help support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron.
And make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP podcasts by going to our YX Lost feed page or directly to all of the reality TV RHAP podcasts by going to robhasawebsite.com/RHAP feed and selecting your podcast service of choice. You'll not only find content like us and the daily live feed updates and all those things, but you'll also prepare yourself for Survivor season, get podcasts on a number of other shows and topics. Speaking of Survivor podcasts, Ovi, you mentioned it. Jessica Lewis and I will be back starting probably next weekend with our Survivor 47 preview, and then every week after to discuss why blank lost for Survivor. So we'll be overlapping for a few weeks here. I'll be pulling double why blank lost duty.
And finally, we want to thank Scott St. Pierre, Jessica Sterling, and the whole RHAP and reality TV wrap-ups behind the scenes team for all they work to do, editing and posting and everything else. We really appreciate everything you do to get our voices from our microphones to your ears. And of course, thank you for everyone listening and watching this week. Please let us know your thoughts. Do you disagree with any of the rules we said about Joseph, or do you think that we were right on the money? Who do you think is going to be doing well going forward? We want to hear it all. Reach out to us on social media or comment right here in these videos you see. And David, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have you back. Enjoyed Cliff, enjoyed Corey before that. Glad to have you back. And yeah, we will, keep going through the season. And, I know things will be a little more predictable, perhaps, without the AI arena. But there's also only 9 house guests left. So, you can't be nominating a third or more if there's a renom of the people there. So had to go. It was the right time, maybe a little earlier, but it was at least now it was the right time. And, we will see what happens from here. But we will be right back here in a week and we'll talk to everyone then. Bye.